CrossFit and many other functional fitness programs are built around high-intensity workouts. The philosophy is simple: go hard or go home, basically in every training session. Unlike many other sports, low-intensity, high-volume training isn't really a core part of the CrossFit methodology. And yet, it clearly works. Millions of people across the globe are getting healthier, happier and fitter by doing a lot of CrossFit-style workouts. What's interesting is that many other sports with similar time domains, such as rowing, track cycling, speed skating, do rely heavily on this low-intensity, high-volume Zone 2 training as part of their training schedule. So this raises an important question in my opinion. Should CrossFit athletes replace some of their high-intensity workouts by low-intensity Zone 2 work? To explore this, we at wod-science launched the Zone 2 project. Over the course of 3 months, we asked our community to follow a specific functional fitness program. One group did classic CrossFit style programming, where strength was followed by a high-intensity functional workout within one session, and the other group replaced some of those high-intensity workouts by typical Zone 2 work on the erg. And in this video, I will break down the study setup as well as the most important results in great detail. So if you are a coach, an athlete, or simply someone who wants to get better in the gym, I think this video will be super valuable to you. All right, this video might be a little bit of a longer one, so strap in and let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Goma. I'm a senior scientist at ETH Zurich, based in Switzerland. And for the last decade or so, I studied and taught different aspects of exercise physiology, and now I want to bring some of that science back to you guys. So it all started a good 3 months ago, where we put out this flyer. We wanted to recruit people from our community for our Zone 2 project. Basically, the aim was to test the effectiveness of low-intensity, high-volume Zone 2 training for CrossFit or in CrossFit style programming. And I have to say, I was pretty surprised by the amount of people who actually signed up. 284 people provided their email address and basically got into the study, which is, I think, quite high. Obviously, it helped that the study or the programming was completely for free. And out of those 284 people, 136 people did all the pre-testing. So that's pretty substantial, because I will show you what the pre-testing exactly was. And yeah, it was quite hard. So obviously some people will drop out. And then 56 people out of those 136 people did both the pre-testing, the training, 80% of all the training, and also the post-testing. This is typical for such a study online, that people obviously, because of injury, because of personal circumstances, just don't do the post-testing. So that's why you have this big drop. But still, we have 56 people who did all the testing, which is, I think, very substantial. Always when you look at such a study, it's important to understand your test subjects, right? The characteristics of your subjects. And I always put the commercial programming group. I will get into exactly what the groups are. But let's say the control group, the classic style programming group, in gray, and then in green is the Zone 2 programming. And you see age, height and weight, it's a bit of an overload slide here, but that doesn't really matter, is pretty typical for, let's say, such a study. We have middle-aged people, 35 to 40 years old. Height is typical, weight is also typical, but interestingly, I think, is that the CrossFit training is pretty high. So they were very experienced people or volunteers, in my opinion. They did on average 5 to 6 years of CrossFit, and they were training more than 6 hours per week, specific CrossFit style training. That is more than what is typically reported in literature, so that's cool. Okay, you can have experienced athletes, but what is their performance? That's also why I put the 1RM clean and the Fran there. I would say it's medium to RX levels. They have 100 kilogram approximately clean for the males, 65 for the women, and their Fran time is a bit above 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes. So I would say if you look at it from the open percentile, there are around 75, P75, maybe P80 in some circumstances. So advanced athletes, but certainly not elites. Okay, so what about the training? That's super important that I explain this very well to you, what they exactly did during those 8 weeks of training. So first I start with the gray group, right? The commercial group. They did 8 weeks of training for 5 days a week. So pretty substantial, only 2 rest days. And they did, I would say, commercial gym CrossFit training, where they go into the gym, they do 20 to 25 minutes of warm-up as well as a strength part and an Olympic lifting part, all right? And then followed by a little bit of rest and then straight into a workout, a typical CrossFit style workout where they used functional movements to get the stimulus in. Importantly, and I will get to that later, is that we kind of alternated between medium intensity, RPE 6 to 7, as well as high intensity training. Not every training was always balls out high intensity work. No, we also tried to monitor their training load because otherwise we thought that some of those people could get overtrained, and that's obviously also not what we want. So how did a typical week look like if you look at it from a little bit more in detail? So Monday was always a rest day, and then they had, as I said, Olympic lifting, for example, hang squat cleans, followed by a high intensity workout, 2 times an AMRAP of 8 minutes. All right, so high intensity is RPE 9, full out. Every AMRAP was as many reps as possible. And then on Wednesday, they did a strength part, for example, deadlift with some shoulder presses, and then a medium intensity workout. All right, so this was always alternated between strength, Olympic lifting, as well as a high intensity, like full all out, and then a medium intensity, which was still high intensity, in my opinion, close to the threshold at RPE 6 or RPE 7. We tried to explain this in a separate chat group on how the intensity distribution had to be so that the people trained exactly how we wanted them to train. That's important. Then we also have obviously the second group, right? The zone 2 group, and they did the same 8 weeks of training for 5 days a week. Importantly, they had exactly the same strength part. So part A, strength and Olympic lifting, was the same as in the commercial group. And then the part B was or a high intensity workout, the exact same high intensity workout using functional movements as in the commercial group, or 3 times per week, I will get to that in the next slide, was pure zone 2 work, where we tried to explain them in which zone they had to be, so a low intensity RPE 3 zone, and they used not functional movements, but monostructural erg work, so biking, echo bike, rowing, and so on, all at low intensity without using functional movements. So how did that look? Here, the same, an overview of their training. Let's say on Tuesday, it was almost or always exactly the same as the commercial group, right? So it was Olympic lifting and then a Metcon. And then on Wednesday, instead of the medium intensity functional movement session, they also did, at the end, you see here, the 44 minutes of zone 2, where they alternated between the ski erg and the bike erg at low intensity. And then the rest of the days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, were very similar, alternating between this high intensity work, high intensity Metcons, and zone 2. They did 3 sessions out of 5 was zone 2, and 2 sessions out of 5 was high intensity functional CrossFit style workouts. All right, so now we know approximately what they did in their training, but what was their total training time and their total training load in each group? So you see here the commercial as well as the zone 2 group. The commercial group trained approximately 250 minutes per week. 3 weeks, let's say, on, so increasing in time, and then a deload week. We always had a deload week, again, not to overreach the people. And you see here that there was kind of an even distribution between strength, power, and then high intensity functional training. So that would be, the blue would be your CrossFit style training. And then obviously the zone 2 had also a similar distribution, but adding this zone 2 work on top of the strength as well as some of the high intensity training. So this means, and that's important, that they trained 21% more total time. Okay, so not exactly the same amount of hours or minutes, they trained more. But this resulted in exactly the same training load. And that's important to understand because we calculated the training load via a method that is also published in literature, that's why we used it, called TRIMP. And that is simply the session RPE, so how hard we think it's going to feel this session. So high intensity is going to be 9, right? Medium intensity is going to be 6 to 7. And then low intensity or zone 2 would be 2 to 3. And that you multiply simply by the session time. So a long zone 2 session would be 45 minutes times 3. A short high intensity session would be maybe 12 minutes times 9, all right? And if we then calculate this for both the commercial as well as the zone 2, we made it that the TRIMP was exactly the same between those two groups. All right, so the training load, at least to our calculations, was exactly the same, but the training time was 21% higher in the zone 2 group because they could obviously add a little bit more volume because it was at lower intensity. More on that later in the video. And then obviously the testing. It's always quite difficult to find good tests to measure or assess overall fitness or overall CrossFit specific fitness by not, and also trying not to burn out the athlete. So this is where we came up with. On Monday, again, rest day. On Tuesday, they did in one session, important, they did a 1RM clean followed by Cindy, which is a 20-minute AMRAP of pull-ups, push-ups, and air squats, obviously, right? So that's just a very typical CrossFit style workout. And many of those people, as they have been training for 6 years and more, they probably have done Cindy in their life, which is, I think, a benefit for testing bias. Wednesday was a rest day, well needed. And then on Thursday, they did the CrossFit total, 1RM back squat, 1RM press, and 1RM deadlift, all in 20 minutes. Also well-known test in CrossFit, followed by a little bit of rest, and then Fran 21, 15, 9 of thrusters and pull-ups. So very typical CrossFit style workouts that everyone kind of knew on beforehand. And then on Saturday, we did the FTP test, which is a dreaded wod-science specific test where we just asked the participants to do 20 minutes of all-out rowing, and we calculated their average watts. Importantly, they had to tape the screen, so they didn't know how much watts they were pulling in this case, or driving. And this test is a very good assessment of pure conditioning. So not CrossFit specific, but rather conditioning, how much watts can your body produce in those 20 minutes. And then we followed that one, so that was a hard day, by 22.1, which is an open workout done 2 years ago. And many of those people also did that workout, so they were kind of familiar with that test. So this was, I think, quite a good overall test of physical fitness. If you do well in all those 6 tests, I think you can say that you are pretty good at CrossFit, right? And vice versa. If you don't do well, you probably have some room for improvement. So before I go into the details of the results, I really wanted to remind you on our upcoming masterclass series. Actually, in early January, we are hosting, let's say, an online masterclass series, which will be held every Wednesday evening for 2 to 4 weeks. And one will be about nutrition, will be held by my co-founder Henning. We will do a deep dive into carbohydrates, proteins, how to assess and improve your game days or your competition nutrition, and also some evaluation and some Q&A. And then also on the same time, so in the same week, I will also host a short masterclass series where we talk about tapering towards competition. I think very useful for people who are participating in the open or other CrossFit competitions, on how to build down the load, maybe also the intensity, to improve your performance on game day. Both of those masterclasses will be evidence-based, where we look at the latest research on the topic, and also include a practical assignment for you to do at home, so you can learn also by doing and not only listening to us. If you're interested, just check the link in the description. We have many masterclasses going on this whole year, and I think some of those might be of interest of you. All right, let's get towards the thing that we all have been waiting for, the data. What you see here is the averages designated by the bars, as well as the individual values pre and post designated by these lines. Immediately, you can see that almost every athlete in each group improved, on average 6 to 7%. That's pretty cool. So we do have some variation between people, but most people increase to the similar 5 to 6%. We did a repeated measures ANOVA on this data to understand if one group improved more than the other group, because indeed you see that the zone 2 increased a little bit more, at least in percentage-wise, compared to the commercial, but this was not the case. This means that both groups statistically improved to the same extent, 6 to 7%. Our programming worked really well, but substituting some high-intensity functional workouts by zone 2 didn't further improve strength, but also did not decrease it. Okay, I will get to some of the discussions of those results later. Then we can also look at some CrossFit specific data. The overall data set is built up the same. You see the averages as well as the individual values for Cindy, Fran, as well as 22.1 in reps. And almost exactly the same happens. Both groups improve significantly, but to exactly the same extent. If you look very carefully, you see a little bit more variation here in the data. Some people didn't really improve, probably maybe they got a little bit overtrained or really had a bad day in the post-testing. It was less, let's say, clean than the strength data, but still our programming worked really well to improve CrossFit specific performance. But including or substituting some of the high intensity workouts by zone 2 didn't further improve anything or didn't decrease any performance. So that's quite interesting to understand, I think. And then we get towards the conditioning or the data on the conditioning. And there I have to say I'm a little bit, not really disappointed, but at least surprised that the data is exactly the same here as for strength as for CrossFit specific workouts. Yes, we increase in both groups to a nice 5 to 7 or 6%, but there was no additional increase in the zone 2 training group. So this means that including zone 2, at least for our data set, didn't increase their specific conditioning, which is quite interesting because they did a lot more typical zone 2 work on the ergs, right, compared to the high intensity functional fitness group. And then I also put all the data together, let's say, and I called this total fitness. So if you add the percentage increase of every test, you add them or you sum them together, you have obviously an increase in total fitness of all the 6 tests. And you see here that our commercial group increased by approximately 5%, and the zone 2 group increased a little bit more, 6.8%, but these differences were not statistically significant. So both groups increased nicely, but to the same extent as I just showed in all the other tests. When you look at that data, obviously we have to talk about some of the limitations and let's say the discussion and how this actually came to fruition. First of all, I think an important thing to consider is, was the training load, the TRIMP, right? Was it really the same? I know we used, let's say, a formula to calculate the specific training load, and I know that based on that formula, the training load was the same. But think about it. If you do Fran, it's only 4 minutes, right? The effects on your body are exponentially harder than doing a 2-hour or a 90 minutes zone 2 bike session on the C2 bike. Right? So it's very difficult, in my opinion, to statistically or mathematically compare both modalities. And I think that's also one of the things that one of our, or many of the zone 2 subjects said in our private chat, is that they felt actually really good. Like it was nice to have a little bit of lower intensity compared to what they or how they were always training. So I think just pure from a more, I mean, it's a little bit of speculation and it's very difficult to assess this deeply, that the training load, if anything, in the zone 2 group was certainly not higher, likely lower than in the commercial group, even though they trained a little bit longer. This is also similar to what I explained, I think, 2 or 3 videos ago, where I explained a very similar study by other research group, where they did it a little bit different. They tried to match the time, so they trained all 6 hours, 5 hours per week, but the training load was much less in the zone 2 group, obviously. And there they saw almost exactly the same results as ours, that their performance in CrossFit improved to the same extent, even though the training load was much less. So this is something you can also consider for our training or for our study, is that the zone 2 guys, they trained maybe a little bit more, but if anything, the training felt less strenuous on the body and they still got the same results or the same effects. And then also, and I'm just, let's say, speculating on what the people said to me and to us in the groups, is that they felt very, very sore. The people from the zone 2 group felt very, very sore in the post-testing, almost more sore than how they felt in the pre-testing. And that is also, I think, because, they didn't really do a lot of specific training towards those tests, right? In the zone 2, they had a lot of zone 2 work, maybe some strength and so on, but they didn't train typical CrossFit style training, high intensity work. So their body was not really used to the high intensity work anymore, at least to a lesser extent. And that's also why they felt sore. And that's maybe also why we saw some of the results. I think if you include some zone 2 work in your training schedule as an athlete, you can do that at certain time points in the season, but not leading up to a specific CrossFit competition, or at least then you have to decrease this low intensity work significantly. I will get to that in a second. And then I think the key part is that our classic programming, like our commercial programming, right, the control group, was very, very well balanced. We thought about this a lot, like we always do in all our programming, to not overtrain our people. That's important. So maybe we simply maxed out the amount of performance you can increase with typical high-intensity functional fitness style, CrossFit style training in our commercial group. So even if you do another training modality or you try to improve this even more, this is just very difficult because we're sitting at the maximal increases in performance. And that's also what we usually see, by the way, this 5 to 8% increase in overall fitness with good programming. So the key point here is that if you use classic style CrossFit programming and you don't overtrain your athlete, even though you're using high intensity work or high intensity workouts, you are probably maxing out the performance, and adding other modalities doesn't really help much. And then one limitation I think as well is that we don't have enough women in our both groups, actually, certainly in the commercial group. That's obviously something we cannot really do much about, and that's why I just added both groups together, which I think is a limitation. But next time when we do such a project, when we do such a study, please also women sign up for our study. So what would be the take home of all this data? I mean, the question obviously is, should I incorporate, or you as an athlete, some zone 2 training into your CrossFit or high intensity functional fitness routine? And then it really depends on which level you are. If you are a beginner, whatever, 1 year, maybe 2 years of experience in CrossFit, I think you should add 0% zone 2 in your training program. I mean, it's simply not applicable. You should focus on moving well, getting stronger, maybe getting a little bit better aerobic base, learning all the movements. Zone 2 work will just strip away quality training time, and I don't think it's very useful for your progress. But then when you get towards an intermediate / advanced level, our study, or our project, as well as the study I explained 3 videos ago, popping up on the screen right now, shows that if you replace some of your high intensity work, really replace, right, by zone 2 work on the ergs, or just decreasing the intensity of your workouts, it doesn't decrease your CrossFit performance. So if you want, and if you, let's say, want to have less load on your body, less total training load on your body, you can, for example, incorporate a little bit of zone 2 here and there in your training schedule. Certainly, when you are training according to a block periodized way, where you structure your training throughout the season, that you focus on specific focus areas throughout the season. Meaning, for example, in the summer, you want to do some conditioning, you want to improve your aerobic base. Yes, then it's a very good idea to do 30-40% of all your training into zone 2. We show that it doesn't decrease your total CrossFit performance, and likely, based on all the data from the endurance training world, you will increase your aerobic conditioning. But then when you come to, for example, this time, close to a competition, the Open, for example, I would not include too much zone 2 work in your overall training schedule. You probably cannot train more than 10 hours a week. So then I would really focus on high intensity functional workouts, where you specifically focus on the movements that potentially will pop up in the Open or in your competition of interest. And then you have the elites, right? And the elites, one of the key parts about elite training, and that's also what is shown certainly from the endurance world, is that you accumulate as much training volume as possible. That's one of the best correlates to overall performance. And I think, to my opinion, you cannot do this by always training at high intensity. All right, you will burn out the athlete. I mean, we have heard at least a couple of stories that athletes are getting burned out by CrossFit, right? And then I think it's almost mandatory, or at least a very good idea, to do some of the workouts at lower intensity throughout your whole training schedule, just simply to be able to accumulate more volume. That's also how the Norwegian method is. They try to accumulate as much volume as possible by decreasing or by keeping the intensity in check. And if you always go to lactate 12, 13 and heart rate 190 every training session, you will just accumulate fatigue, and maybe you will actually decrease your performance on the long term. So that's really where zone 2 work can be useful. And we show again that replacing some of your high intensity work by lower intensity zone 2 work is not detrimental to CrossFit specific performance. All right, as this is a scientific project, we want to be as transparent as possible. So that's why we decided to put the training from our zone 2 group, so the group B, fully available on our website for free. So you can just go to a website, open the link, you will be directed to Strive. That's our software that we use for our programming. And you can just sign up for free, and you can follow the 8 weeks of training for free. And you can expect 5 to 8% improvements in overall fitness. So I think that's very useful for people who are interested and want to learn how zone 2 could feel on the body while still doing functional fitness. If you want to train a little bit more specific, please also go ahead and have a look at our other programming tracks that follow, let's say, a more block periodized way of training, where we focus on specific aspects of fitness throughout the season. Because we really believe that, one, you have to structure your training, I mean, as evidenced by our results here, as well as structure your training within the season, where you focus specifically on strength in one part of the season, then 10 weeks later you follow more a conditioning style program, and then go to power and CrossFit specific training. If you're interested in that, just scan the QR code that is popping up on the screen right now, or check the link, the first link in the description, for a 7-day free trial for our programming. All right, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and also liking the video. It really helps out to push this information out there so more people can understand the effect of low intensity work on a typical high intensity functional fitness sport, because I believe that it's very important to share this information with everyone so that the community can learn and that we can only produce even more fit human beings across the globe. All right, thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about the other study I talked about, where they also incorporated some low intensity work into CrossFit specific training and actually found pretty similar results as ours, just click the video popping up right here.